Let's get joined up. I'm Wayne Kelly, and this episode is sponsored by Picklock Publishing, the imprint behind my debut novel, Safe Hands, which tells the story of Mickey Blake, a retired safecracker pulled out of retirement for one last job, and Hazel, a desperate mother driven to kill to protect her son from being sucked into a life of crime. It's out now on Kindle, paperback and audiobook, and if you use the link in the show notes, you can get a free 30-day trial of Audible and listen to the book for free. That's Safe Hands by me, W.A. Kelly. Right, advertising done. Let's crack on with the show. Now, where's that jingle? Joined up writing. Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 220, and it's with psychological thriller writer Helen Cooper, who I interviewed in front of a live audience at Leicester's Central Library recently. It was the first Joined Up Live, and I got to chat to Helen about her latest gripping book, My Darling Boy, as well as how she became a writer, what makes a great psychological thriller, why perseverance is everything, and of course we'll get to hear about the book that saved her life. Before that, a very quick update from me, and I have to say I'm still buzzing from doing the first of what I hope is many live events for the podcast. It's only taken me 10 years to get around to doing it. It definitely brings a different dynamic to proceedings, and also meant that we could have some questions from the audience at the end as well. I got to meet loads of fantastic local writers and readers, and all while being surrounded by books in a library, so, you know, what's not to like? On the writing front, I'm still battling with the first of my current work in progress, the sequel to Safe Hands, but I've had a bit of a breakthrough over the last couple of days. I've discussed this on the show in the past. I'm not much of a planner, as you may know. I have to find the characters, see what they're about, and then stop to plot as I go. It's a messy, unnerving process, and I really wish I could do it differently, but this just seems to be how I do it. I think it makes for a more interesting story in the end, from my point of view anyway, but it does mean I have to waste a lot of words and go down many cul-de-sacs before I find the right road. The latest impasse was broken after I chatted through my concerns with my daughter, who is also one of my first readers. And what I find is that the person you're talking to doesn't actually have to come up with the solutions. They just have to be prepared to listen to you laying it all out for them and trying to make it make sense. And for me, just the act of saying it out loud in a way that could make sense to another human being usually helps me find the solution to whatever issue I happen to be having at the moment. And in this instance, it was just one question from my daughter that broke the levee and allowed me to see where I need to take the story next. I took myself away from the computer, I got a notebook and pen, and I sat in the garden making notes, and now I think I'm ready to tackle the final third of the book, so wish me luck. But what about you? Have you got any tips for solving story problems, or anything else that sustains you through the nightmare that can be your first draft? Or drop me a line and let me know. As you know, I love to hear from you and I'll always reply. You can do that by emailing wayne@waynekellyWrites.com or dropping me a line on the Facebook or Twitter pages. And if you sign up to my monthly newsletter at waynekellyWrites.com, you'll get a free ebook with 2 new crime stories along with a monthly email about all things books, writing and podcasts. It's free. I only send one a month. So, you know, what have you got to lose? Right. Let's not dilly-dally anymore. Let's crack on with today's interview and a fascinating chat with Helen Cooper. I'll take you to my live intro now and we can catch up again at the end. I hope you enjoy it. And to new listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you're listening to it on. And that way you can hear the latest episode whenever it drops. So here we go, the first Joined Up Live, recorded at Central Library in Leicester. Joined Up Writing. So first of all, I'll introduce Helen properly, so I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. So Helen is a writer of psychological thrillers. Obviously, she lives in Leicester. She's taught English and academic writing in both further and higher education and was head of learning enhancement at the University of Birmingham. She's got an MA in creative writing from Nottingham Trent University, and she's been published in Woman, Writers' Forum, Miss Lexia, the Lincolnshire Echo, Derbyshire Life, and on the Crime Readers Association website. She was shortlisted for the Bath Short Story Prize in 2014 and came third in the Leicester Wright Short Story Prize in 2018. Her novels include The Downstairs Neighbour, The Other Guest, The Couple in the Photo, and now, obviously, her latest book, which we're going to be talking about this evening, My Darling Boy. She's also the president of the Leicester Writers Club, and she lives in Leicester with a new husband and a cat. So, again, just welcome Helen.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Well, thanks for joining me, Helen.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. I know you've had to come a long way, travelling in all the way from Leicester to Leicester,
so
but
far.
I do appreciate it. Thank you. Just start off just by telling us how things are going in your writing world, and obviously your private life as well is getting quite exciting just lately.
Yeah, it's been quite a big month. So, as you said, I got married 3 weeks ago now, something like that. And just when we got back from honeymoon, My Darling Boy came out. Literally 2 days later, on the same day, was when I took over as president of Leicester Writers Club. It's been a really, really big month. Very, very busy, but great stuff going on. Really
exciting. So why don't we start off, just tell us about your latest book, My Darling Boy. So just give us the premise and tell us what it's all about.
Sure. So it's set in a village in Derbyshire, which is where I'm originally from. Not a village, but Derbyshire. And it's about two best friends, Chrissy and Alice, who are long-term best friends in the village, and their sons grow up to be best friends as well. Until one night at a New Year's Eve party at the local pub, which Chrissy owns, their two sons fight, and Robbie ends up getting killed. We then fast forward 2 years, and Leo, the other son, has gone to prison. He's served a sentence for manslaughter. The rest of the village is basically torn apart. Chrissy and Alice have gone from best friends to enemies. And Chrissy goes to collect Leo from prison. He's got early parole. She's planning to bring him back to the village, even though she's getting threats and she's been basically ostracised. But when she goes to pick him up, he's not there. So he's already been released, but he's basically vanished. And the story kind of escalates from there in terms of the whole village is sort of under suspicion. What's happened to Leo? Some people think it's him kind of planning something. Some people think somebody's done something to him. A lot of secrets start to unravel. All the good stuff, basically.
All the stuff that go into this amazing genre that's psychological thrillers.
Yeah.
And it's your fourth book in this particular genre. What is it that you love about this genre? And for people, we're just saying psychological thrillers, but some people might not even know what that means. What is a psychological thriller?
Sure. So they're sometimes called, particularly my area of psychological thrillers, they're often called domestic suspense or domestic noir, domestic thrillers. Basically because there's that emphasis on families, relationships, the home, communities. So it's kind of crimes and sort of dark and shocking events, but taking place within those very, very familiar settings. And I think that's what I really, really like about it, is because I love reading about families, relationships, just people's ordinary lives. But then if you throw in a bit of murder and dark stuff as well, then even better, even juicier. And I think you can. It's sort of. So I love other crime genres as well. So, but if you're reading about sort of conspiracy theories in high up politics, or if you're reading about massive crime rings, you can't relate to it as much, I think, as you can within my genre. It's so close to your normal life, you can almost think, imagine if it was me, what would I do in that scenario? And like you say, the emphasis is on the word psychological there, in terms of what drives people to do things, ordinary people, to do quite dark things. So yeah, that's what it's all about. That's what I love about it.
And what attracted you to it in terms of, was there other particular books that you liked before you came to it yourself? Have you got like a favourite in the genre?
Yeah, I've got loads of favourites. So my overall favourite, long-term favourite, is Lisa Jewell. Don't know if there's any fans here.
Lisa Jewell fan?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's absolutely amazing. She started off actually writing rom-coms and more sort of general women's fiction. But her books, and this is kind of what I did as well, her books got gradually darker. But I think that puts her in a unique position where she's really, really good at writing relationships, families, characters, so good at writing characters. But she's just brilliant at blending the domestic with the dark.
Yeah.
And she's brilliant. Leanne Moriarty, she's similar. You know, you feel like you're reading people that you really, really know and care about. And yet there's this sort of suspenseful mystery unfolding without you even really noticing it, just sort of in the fabric of their normal lives. Louise Candlish, she's similar. I really like her because she's sort of, again, very much domestic settings, but really topical in terms of the things that are sort of the way people live now, and the things that occupy us, aspirations, resentments, again, the things about society that might lead ordinary people to commit crimes or do out of character things. So yeah, but actually, thinking back, my original, so a long-term influence for me is Daphne du Maurier, who you wouldn't necessarily think of as domestic suspense. She's, I guess, more associated with gothic fiction, or she writes horror as well. But she's got so many elements of the genre. So My Cousin Rachel was a book that absolutely blew me away when I read it, because you just constantly switch between. So it's about a guy who's trying to find out whether his cousin was murdered by his wife, poisoned, or whether he died of an illness. And every single chapter, you just switch back and forth in terms of who you think's guilty and what you think the truth is and who you trust. And I love that about the genre as well, is you never quite know who you can trust. It's full of people that have got secrets. You never quite know if you've been told full truths, half-truths, outright lies, if you're being misled. That feeling of sort of having the rug pulled under you and then thinking you've got it and then realising, no, I haven't. So it really keeps you on your toes.
Secrets are a massive part of the genre, I would say.
Massively, yeah, absolutely.
People withholding information and
yeah.
you're not quite getting the story that you think you are.
Yes, and that can be really tricky to write sometimes, because you want to give your readers access to your characters' thoughts and feelings. But if they've got a secret that you don't quite want your readers to know yet, that can be really, really tricky to handle. So a lot of it, and that's, when you read somebody doing that really well in terms of just feeding us enough, but then, or perhaps deliberately misleading us a little bit about what this character's actually thinking about or actually doing, then yeah, I just find that really, really impressive.
So you've mentioned in your intro, you've written academic stuff as well. So aside from that, in terms of fiction, have you always written in this genre, or have you tried other stuff, and how has that kind of panned out?
I haven't always written in this genre, no. And in fact, when I first started writing, I was about 7, so I definitely didn't know that this genre existed. But even when I started writing sort of seriously as an adult, I don't think I fully knew that this genre existed, or didn't know that it was a genre. It's really taken off in like the last 15 years or so. And I think actually when I started writing, one of the big problems was I didn't really know what I was writing. I didn't know what genre I was writing in. I was just writing about characters. I was writing stories. A lot of them were, I suppose, more general fiction, maybe more what you call women's fiction, whatever that is. And when I first actually started trying to get an agent and a publisher, that was a lot of the feedback that came back was it didn't sit clearly in a genre. And again, I think that's because I didn't know enough about genre. So I started gradually, as I wrote more and more books, I started gradually moving more towards the dark side. And I suppose, again, the genre that I've ended up in, I've got everything that I've always loved about writing in terms of writing characters, writing relationships. But you've got an easy driver in a way. So if you put a mystery in there, like a missing person, then you've got just such an easy plot driver in a way, and you can do all the character stuff and the family stuff along the way, but you've got something that's propelling the plot, and that makes it quite a lot easier, really.
Yeah, and genre fiction, I mean, I know some people sort of look down on genre fiction sometimes, don't they? But you can do so much within whatever genre it is, whether it's psychological thriller or whether it's romance or whatever it is. There's so much more that you can do in that, and you can bring more readers to it because it's just much more accessible, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And easier to sell, presumably, as well, for publishers because they know where to put it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I think so. I think you can do, people think that genre is really restricting, or that trying to be commercial is somehow the opposite of being creative, but I don't think it is at all. I think you can think about what's going to sell, you can think about what kind of stories people want to read, and then you can think about what you want to do within that framework, and you can still be creative with that. And I really, really enjoyed thinking about genre now and audience and like the hook of the novel and sort of what's going to be its selling point and what people are going to like about it. I really like all that side of it, and I don't think it takes away from the creativity.
No, I totally agree. So let's take a bit of a step back then. Just so you hinted at it there. You talked about when you started thinking about writing and when you were 7 or whatever. So take me back to some of those earliest. What is your earliest memory of writing? How did you come to it, and what do you love about it?
I've always written stories. Well, as long as I can remember. I used to say that I wanted to be an author when I was little, and I used to sort of make books by folding up pieces of paper. And did you do that? Yeah. And so when I was about 7, I think I wrote what I thought was a novel, but it was like probably a couple of pages
probably
long.
Only a
but
novella. That's all. Yeah, it's only a novella. Yeah,
absolutely. And it was called When I Changed. So my mum still has it. It was about me changing into a tortoise, and then a zebra, and then back to a tortoise for reasons best known to my 7-year-old self.
Probably a metaphor there somewhere.
No, it was very Kafkaesque. yeah, absolutely. And my grandma typed it up for me, and she made it into a proper little book, and I did a cover for it, and she did like notes about the author at the back. I consider that my first novel, definitely. Yeah. Wrote loads of stories then, but I mean, so many of them were just completely ripped off from stuff that I was reading or stuff that I was watching on the TV. Massively plagiarised. But I suppose that's how you learn in a way, is by copying the authors that you admire. And then fast forwarding a few years, so when I went to uni and did English literature and language, and I did a creative writing module there, and that was kind of the first time I'd seriously shown people stuff that I'd written since the tortoise days, tortoise phase.
Never live up to that.
No, and it was really scary, but it was amazing, and I think I kind of got the bug from that. So after that, I was sort of debating what I wanted to do. Obviously, it's not an easy career to embark on. When you're little, you can say, I want to be an author. But when you're older, you kind of stop saying it because people are like, okay, then, yeah, sure.
It's like saying I'm an astronaut.
Yeah,
really.
Exactly. So I was thinking about what else I wanted to do. I was going to do a PhD, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do it in. I was going to train as a teacher, which I eventually did do. But I ended up doing a master's in creative writing, which, again, I wasn't sure I wanted to do. It felt a bit indulgent in a way, like, writing was a hobby, so to do like a whole postgrad around it. But everyone was like, no, don't think like that. And my friends and family and everyone were really, really encouraging, and I'm really glad they were, because it's not the only route by any means, and it's not for everyone. But for me, it was a way to sort of start taking it seriously, learn about the genre, learn about the industry rather, learn craft. I met other people, obviously, that were writing, and that was a way for me to do that. And so from there, it was still a long road after that, but that was a bit of a turning point for me in terms of this might be something I could actually pursue.
And thinking about it, like as you say, sort of taking it seriously, that's how you took it seriously.
Yeah.
So tell me about you. So in terms of your path to publication, I think your first published fiction novel was The Downstairs Neighbour.
Yeah.
But was that the first novel you actually wrote? Because it's not usually.
No, not by a long way, no. So obviously there was the Tortoise novel, that's where it all began. But after that, I started loads of novels. I was forever writing first chapters and then abandoning them. But the first novel that I actually finished it started off as my dissertation for my master's. And then afterwards I finished it and I started sending it out to agents. And I got some positive feedback. I got a lot of rejections. I got some positive feedback in terms of people like the writing. But again, the feedback that I was getting was they weren't sure where it would sit in the market. And that was true. It had a teenage protagonist, but it wasn't YA. And it was an interesting book. I liked it, but it was sort of about people fitting into worlds that they might not have thought they fit into. So the teenage boy goes to live in a retirement village with his granddad, and his mum, who's the other sort of point of view in the book, she falls in love with a guy who's in the circus, and she kind of ends up being drawn into that world. So there was all sorts going on with it. But again, I don't know what genre it was. Yeah. So there was this sort of YA type storyline with kind of a coming of age with the boy, but then there was a bit of a romance with the mum. So I think that's why it was never a goer. But I rewrote it loads of times and I kept sending it out. And again, I got bits of nice feedback. But eventually I realised this is not the one, which it rarely is with your first novel. And I put it away and I wrote... So let me remember. So I wrote another one after that was more of a rom-com. And I don't think I ever sent it out to agents, but I did pitch it to one because I went to loads of those like how to get an agent type events on loads of courses on how to get published and stuff like that. I was determined. And I did pitch it to someone at that who said she, again, wasn't sure. She said it sounded a bit literary from the pitch. And I was like, I thought I was writing a rom-com. So it's kind of same kind of thing again. So I abandoned that one. Then I wrote another one, which was called What the Mountains Know, which was set in Scotland. And this one, I really applied myself to I looked at all the feedback I'd had so far. I thought I knew I was aiming in the market anyway. It was the kind of Leanne Moriarty, sort of what they call upmarket women's fiction. But it did have a darker twist and it had a bit of a mystery at the centre of it. And that was the one that got me an agent. So I sent that out and actually quite quickly got a call from Helen, who's my agent now, saying she wanted to read the whole thing. And I did send her the whole thing. I went down to London to meet her and she loved it. So I signed with her. So obviously you think that's it.
You're
then.
away.
That's the happy ending. But it wasn't quite. So we edited that novel for a couple of months together, and then she sent it out to a load of big publishers, about 13 of them, I think, just ahead of the London Book Fair. So this was in 2014 now, I think. And she was trying to whip up an auction. So she'd sent it to all of them and she was trying to get this big buzz going. And I remember her saying to me, so do you want to see the rejections as they come in, or shall I save them all for the end?
Kind of
I was like, rejections? Yeah. I was like, you said
Rude.
My book was brilliant. Yeah. Everyone would jump at it, but then I said, okay, yeah, you can send me them as they come. But what that meant was because she was trying to get this sort of auction going and a bit of excitement, they were coming in thick and fast, basically. So I was there at work. Oh, there's another one. And my agent kept saying, but they're really positive rejections. They're really nice rejections. This is great. And I was like, and they were really, they all had really complimentary things to say. But by the end of the process, they had all said no. And again, the thing seemed to be it was slightly falling between two genres. So loads of them said, we really like the writing, we want to see what she does next, but we don't think this is it. We don't think this is breakthrough enough to be a debut. They sort of said the writing is really literary, but it's not a literary novel, and it's set up as a thriller, a mystery, but it hasn't quite got the drive and pace of a thriller. So this, again, really. And so I was absolutely devastated, really. And I thought that'd be it. I thought my agent was going to ditch me, or the whole thing was game over. But she was amazing, really. She just said, no, she said, think of all the positives they've said. They don't normally say, yeah, we want to look at future work. So we just got to pick ourselves up and write another book. So that's what I did. And in fact, I wrote 2 more books after that. So I gathered all the feedback, because actually what I realised was, so they'd all the rejection notes that I'd got were actually, they had really detailed feedback in them about what they'd liked about the book and why they'd said no, basically, in the end. So that was really, really helpful. And, you know, you don't normally get that from 13 experts sort of in the publishing industry, like a full breakdown of what they think about your book. So I sort of took all of that on board. I made this massive table, and I sort of broken it down into like character, structure, plot, pace, stuff like that, and put what they'd all said. And partly it was very illuminating, because you'd end up with completely contradictory bits of feedback next to each other. So it just shows how subjective it is, really. But I just looked at what the recurring themes were, and then I used those to write the next book, which, well, we'll skip over the one. I did write one that my agent then said, no, this isn't the one. So there was another one in between, but then I wrote The Downstairs Neighbour, and again, I just snowballed all that feedback, and I absolutely threw everything at it. You know, I decided I was going to go full thriller, because I sort of had to decide, are you going to go more towards the literary women's fiction side or more thriller? So I went full thriller, and I just threw every kind of thriller trick in the book at it, and I worked really, really hard on it, and I think I could feel that it was better, but when that one went out on submission, I absolutely felt sick, and because it felt like the last chance kind of thing. And it was all very dramatic, because my agent it was on her last day before she was due to go on maternity leave, and she was been told to be on full bed rest because she'd had a difficult pregnancy. So she was doing the whole submission process like from her bed. She was taking phone calls and everything. Bless her, dedication. And yeah, literally on the last day, I then got an offer from Hodder, and they offered me a 2-book deal. So it was, dramatic.
So the theme there, I would say, is that if anybody's aspiring writers out there, is perseverance.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, God, yes.
So how long? So roughly, in terms of years, from when you first thought, right, here's my first book that's going out, to when it happened, I suppose it's
probably about 10 years. Yeah, something like that. Maybe not quite. Maybe 8. But yeah.
Were there times before that you felt like giving up?
In
terms of maybe not giving up writing, but in terms of
sometimes
submitting, maybe.
Yeah, but there was always something that kept me going. So there was always a nice bit of feedback, some encouraging words from an agent. So there was always something that made me keep going, and I knew it was the only thing I really wanted to do as well. And the more other jobs I got, the more I realised that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, it's very motivating when you're in quite a stressful job and you think, I just want to be writing. So, yeah, that really did drive me forward.
And that fired you up. So in terms of your process, how has that changed over the time of, particularly from your first published book? Has that changed in the last 4 books at all? If you were sitting down to start a book tomorrow, have you got a specific way of doing things, or is it a little bit haphazard? Talk to us about your process.
Sure. So I don't think it has changed all that much, although I think now I think what I've learned a lot from going through the editing process, like a professional editing process, 4 times. So I've got 2 editors, because I've got a publisher in the US now as well, and in the UK, and they sort of work together to give me feedback. So going through that editing and redrafting process so many times I think that's in a way, it's made me more able to preempt what feedback is going to come back from the first draft, and I think more able to maybe spot potential pitfalls that I'm going to fall into earlier on. So I think, although, I mean, my first draft, they still need absolutely loads of editing, but I think I'm more able to kind of spot, okay, I'm relying too much on that character who's got a bit of a sketchy motivation, or that subplot isn't really adding anything. So I think I've got better at that. But my process overall, I think, has stayed roughly the same. So I'm not a huge planner. I do plan, but I'm more like, I kind of start with pen and paper. I start with an idea always, so it'll be like, so for example, the book that I'm just starting now, it's set in a theatre, and it's about a child actor who goes missing from the theatre on the opening night of a show. So that's the idea that I started with. And so from there, it'll be like, okay, which characters are involved? Whose story is it? And so I decided it's the story basically of the chaperone, so the woman that's supposed to be looking after this girl and keeping her safe. I'll think about setting, obviously that's got the theatre setting. And from there, what I tend to do is start writing down, okay, what are all the possible things that could have happened to this girl? And that's the bit where I'm just allowing myself to write down anything that's even just completely crazy stuff. And what I'll then end up with, it usually is one thing that I think, yeah, that's going to be the answer. That's what happened to her. And then I'll usually end up with a few things that I can develop as red herrings along the way. And I really start from there, and then I start writing. So I don't plan much more. I usually have a sort of an idea of what the twists are going to be, mm-hmm. and roughly where they're going to fall in the book, and what the end solution's going to be. Mm-hmm. And then I'll start writing. And usually I'll write a few chapters and realise I need to do a bit more planning. So then I'll go back and do slightly more detailed planning, and then I'll write a bit more, and then stop again and do a bit more planning. So it's like a mix of like pantsing and plotting.
Plantsing, yeah.
Plantsing, yeah, I think so.
And there'll be obviously there's lots of writers in here, but there are obviously lots of people that probably don't. They probably just think you write a book, first draft. There you go, you send it off. Just give them a bit of a sense. You've kind of hinted at it there, but obviously the fact that there is this rewriting process, and obviously you do some rewriting before you send it to your editor, who then looks. Just talk us through that a little bit for people that might not know that.
Yeah, so the first draft really is just only the beginning, and I think this is what you do learn when you start to write properly. And so yeah, I'll get to the end of the first draft. I am a bit of a one for doing too much editing along the way, and sometimes that's not a good thing, because I'll write the first chapters, and then I'll maybe obsessively edit them, but then later on I'll end up throwing them out completely. So it's a waste of time, and I tell myself not to do it every time, but I still do it. But yeah, the first draft, they always say, is you telling yourself the story. And then after that, you have to think about what actually is the best way to tell this story. So you start off, I guess you're thinking really for yourself, and you're thinking, what's the story? What are the characters? What's the development? And then you start to think, okay, you start to think more about your readers, I suppose, after that point, in terms of what's going to keep them turning the pages. Does that need to be there? Does that need to move to later on? Are the reveals happening at the right time? Have I started in the right place? Am I even telling this from the right point of view? So there's like so many decisions that need to be made, and sometimes they're made even after you've written 90,000 words. So usually I end up doing probably 6 or 7 drafts, I think, by the end of it, and definitely 3 or 4 big scale drafts. So I'll probably get to the end of the first draft and then absolutely gut it sometimes. Massive restructure, and it's really difficult, but that first draft is never wasted, I don't think, because again, it's you telling yourself the story, it's you learning about the characters, and then once you've got that in the back of your mind, you can think, right, actually I'm just going to turn this all around and tell this in a slightly different way that's going to be more effective. And then I'll usually probably do a couple of those quite big structural edits, usually with a bit of input from my editors, from my agent, from my husband. He's very good. And then after that, it's slightly easier form of editing in terms of it's more like polishing. It's more like thinking, right, that scene needs to have a little bit more of this in it, and that character needs bringing out a little bit more, and the motivation needs to be clearer there, and I can bring in a bit more of the setting and the atmosphere here. So, and that's the bit that I love the most, is when all the big hard structural stuff is done, and now you're just trying to make it a better book, and that's the really fun bit. And then you have all the copy editing, so a copy editor comes in and sort of points out stuff like it's been Tuesday 3 days in a row now, and stuff like that, which I always have. And then you obviously have proofreading and all of that kind of stuff. So then you really get down to the nitty gritty of the grammar and punctuation. But at that stage, you know that the book is nearly done, so it's not so painful.
It's not so bad. So it's a long old process, basically.
It really, really is. Yeah,
lots and lots goes into it. So how do you fit all this around, normal life when you're not writing? Have you got kind of a schedule? Have you got like a set way of doing it? Do you write at certain times of the day or the week or whatever?
So I'm quite lucky because I write full time, and bar a little bit of teaching that I do on the side now, so I can kind of treat it like a job in terms of get up in the morning, have your breakfast, go to your desk, and then just stay there for most of the day, which I do try to do. But I do like having the flexibility. So if I want to go and see somebody on a Wednesday afternoon or meet a friend for coffee, then I can do. I just have to plan in when am I going to get the words in another time. I think when it gets really tough for me is when I'm getting close to a deadline and it gets really, really, or when I'm in the midst of one of those huge structural edits, and that's when it just gets really, really intense. And I'll be then, so normally I write probably 2,000 words-ish a day, but when it gets close to deadline, I'm on more like 5,000 or 6,000 words a day, and it's absolutely intense. My fingers go into spasm sometimes, and they cramp up. My eyes are like pink from staring at the screen, and that's when I think my work-life balance sort of goes out the window, and I can't really think about anything else. And I always tell myself I should spread that intensity out more next time, as in, when I'm at the beginning of a book and the deadline feels really far away, I'm working all the time, but I'm a lot more casual about it, and I'm thinking,
it's off in the distance.
Yeah, that's it. And I feel like I can afford to sort of pace around my writing room, thinking about what I'm going to write and stuff, and I'm a lot slower, and I'm tinkering with the prose and stuff, and then it gets to later on, and it's close to the deadline, and I'm just feel like I'm losing my mind, and I think, why don't I just sort of spread this out a little bit more? But I just can't seem to do it like that somehow.
It just is what it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it is what it is. So obviously we're in a library, so we should probably talk about books and reading in particular. And there's a quote that I like from Stephen King where he says, "If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write." Is that something you agree with? And even for people who don't want to write, why do you think fiction is so important, and why should people get themselves a library card as soon as we're in the library?
Yeah. I think certainly for a writer, if you want to be a writer, reading is really, really important. So not even just reading in your genre, just reading really widely, enjoying the stories obviously, but also thinking about, why is this working for me or not working for me? What is the writer doing here? And also I think through reading, I think you learn stuff like how to write dialogue, how to construct a scene. You learn stuff about structure without even quite realising that you're learning it, and about storytelling. You learn about different ways of telling a story. So I think it's so important. And I think more generally as well, so reading just makes you more empathetic as a person, and I think that's important for a writer, obviously, because you need that if you're creating characters, but I just think it's important for everybody. So what writers can do in terms of making you understand someone else's point of view, and not even just understand it, but just absolutely immersing you in it. So somebody from a different walk of life, totally different perhaps perspective to you, sort of by reading a book about them and kind of entering into their life and walking in their shoes, being in their head. I think that's just so powerful. And I think I naively think that if everybody just read loads of books about people from all different walks of life, then we wouldn't have half the problems that we do in the world. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
well, it's a nice thought. I agree. I think it does make you empathetic. I agree. And on that subject of books, I've got a segment that I basically call the book that saved your life, and I've even got a jingle. George, cue the jingle for us.
It's the book that saved my life. Yeah, it's the book that saved my life.
So not to make it too overdramatic at all.
Yeah, wow. To think of one now.
Obviously, it doesn't have to be a book that literally saved your life.
Okay.
But in terms of what is a book or books that have been important to you in your life, it might be something from when you were younger or something more recently. But if I said that to you, what sort of springs to mind?
Well, when I was younger, it was always so like Jacqueline Wilson, Judy Blume, Anne Fine. It was all of those. And I think I didn't actually read many books that were sort of very fantastical or adventurous. I liked reading like about real life and like gritty real life. My husband still thinks now that I just read and watch really bleak, miserable things.
Like my wife, yeah.
Yeah,
my wife does as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Depressing, yeah.
Maybe that's true. I do like some happy things as well. But yeah, looking back, it's like Anne Fine in particular, she obviously wrote for children, but she wrote about trauma, really. It was bereavement, divorce, all of that, and I just lapped it up. But I think that was a lot of how I learned about life. So I think I was lucky. I had a really happy childhood. And I think it was through reading that I learned about, the messiness of life and times when life might not be so happy. And so I think it does prepare you in a way. So when times do get hard, you sort of recognise it in a way because you've been through it with some characters that you absolutely loved and related to. And one in particular, so not necessarily a book that saved my life, but a book that really stuck with me was Anne Fine's The Tulip Touch, which is such a dark book looking back. But I read it several times, and it's about these two girls that have this really intense friendship. And one of them is quite troubled and a bit of a troublemaker. She sets things on fire, basically. But there's all these hints in the book about sort of why she was like that in a way. So hints about her parents and her home life and things like that. And aside from being just a really thrilling book, so I remember the sort of racing towards the end of it and being like, wow, that was like so page-turning. I think it was also just quite psychologically interesting. And I guess, the books that I write now and read now are all about the sort of psychology of people that might sort of do bad things or end up in a bad place in their life. And that was one of the first times I remember really reading about that. So it really stuck with me. And interestingly, later on, one of the books that really affected me was We Need to Talk About Kevin. And that's the same kind of thing, isn't it, in terms of the psychology behind someone that's done something really awful. And I guess you can see that in my books now as well. I like exploring that sort of idea of nobody's really good or bad. And We Need to Talk About Kevin was an interesting one because I thought it was an absolutely amazing book. And then I remember reading, and it sort of won the Orange Prize for fiction and everything. And then I think I was in a stage in my life then where I thought that must have been the first book she'd written, and wow, it had completely taken off. And I remember thinking, gosh, I wish I could write something like that. And then I remember reading, actually, no, she'd written loads of books before, including some that had got published and hadn't really done very well. So that kind of changed my outlook in that way as well, thinking, okay, you just have to work at it. Nobody just right off the bat writes a book like that. So yeah, I'm not sure if they saved my life, but they definitely
influenced you.
Yeah, I think influenced me.
I think that's
absolutely.
I think that last point particularly is really important, because I think a lot of people, whether they're just starting out writing or they've been writing for a long time, I think, especially with social media and everything now, and there's this comparisonitis, and everybody just assumes everybody's just, rocketing off to success like from nothing. And I think the more you hear and the more you talk to people that have been doing it for decades or whatever, and
absolutely.
it's just taken a long, long time to break through, and there's a lot of people that it's just a case of just hanging on and just keeping going, and probably remembering why you got into writing in the first place. Not necessarily to get published, it was because you like writing.
Yeah. So like Ian Rankin, I think it was his 8th book that actually was big. Lee Child was similar. They're all sort of seen as overnight successes, but they're overnight successes after like 15 years of writing or something. So I think it's quite inspiring, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of on that subject, what would you say has kind of been the most memorable piece of creative advice that you've been given along the way?
So there've been quite a lot. I do think the less is more principle is massive in terms of, particularly when you're starting out, learning to just strip it back, learning to trust yourself to tell a story without over-explaining, over-describing, and learning to trust your readers as well, to just infer a lot of what you're not actually putting on the page. So that was huge. And then the other thing I think beyond that was learning a lot about story structure and story drive. So I think I've always been able to create characters and write prose, but thinking about actually what makes a compelling story, what keeps the reader turning the pages. And I do remember actually when I did my dissertation, my master's, my dissertation tutor, David Belbin, one of the things he said to me, which I still think about now, is always be thinking, what is the reader waiting to find out? So in every chapter, every scene, what are they waiting for? And that's always stuck with me, and I try to think about that when I feel like my book's kind of lagging a bit in tension sometimes as well.
That's great. And for any aspiring writers that hear, and maybe there's people that are thinking about writing, they might not have even put pen to paper yet, and it's something that they're considering. Have you kind of got any advice or anything? I know obviously a big part of what you do is you're in a writing group is probably one thing, but have you got huge. any other advice for people?
Yeah, I think writing groups, I would absolutely all day long recommend that. And, even more broadly than that, just seeking out feedback and not being afraid of it. It is a bit scary, and trying to see negative feedback as something useful rather than something that will make you disheartened and make you give up. You want people to tell you your book's brilliant and your writing's brilliant, and you should listen when they do and believe them. But also, far more useful is for them to tell you, no, this isn't working because of this, this and this, or you need to do this and this to it, or I thought this about it. So absolutely lapping up that feedback from everywhere you can. Believing the good stuff as well, believing in yourself. And as we've said throughout this is perseverance. You don't get good at it overnight. You have to keep learning, practicing, implementing feedback, writing, basically. It's like with everything, you get better and better with practice.
That's brilliant. We then moved on to taking some questions from the audience. The technical limitations of the venue meant we couldn't mic up the audience this time, so I'll give you a précis of each one, the first of which picked up on Helen's admiration of Daphne du Maurier and asked if Helen had considered blending more literary fiction with the thriller elements for future books.
I would if my publishers would let me, yeah. I think that's brilliant. And I think actually there is a market for that, and there's some absolutely amazing literary thrillers out there. But I do think it's a really difficult one. You have to... I think a lot of it is in the literary part comes a lot from the themes, I think, as well as from the writing style. But you have to make sure you've got that thrillery element in there. And sometimes I think it can be difficult to balance the two. But I've seen so many writers do it well. And I would like to to kind of do that as well.
The next question asked if Helen ever got emotional when writing some of the more intense or darker scenes of her books.
Yeah, I think I do. I think, the idea that I've actually quite long been fascinated, perhaps morbidly so, with this idea of, killing someone just in an instant with a sort of a fluke punch or a push or something like that. And then, particularly if it's someone that you love, like a friend, and then that's their life over, but it's your life over as well, basically, just like that. And that was what I wanted to explore in that book. And I did find it emotional, because it really is something that you could imagine not necessarily happening to you, but to somebody you know. And it was very much a book where I wanted people to think, imagine if, what would I do if I was in that scenario? So yeah, I do sometimes get emotional in scenes. I don't think I want my readers to be emotional. I think when I'm writing them, I'm that little bit removed from it, because I'm thinking too much about how to construct the scene and almost how to construct the emotion. So sometimes that, I think, gets in the way of you feeling emotional. But certainly I think as you get later on in the book and you've been with the characters a long time and you getting quite attached to them, then yeah, I do.
The next audience member wanted to know how much Helen's characters control what she writes, and if she sometimes feels they take on a life of their own.
I like that you said control, not controlling there. That's very kind, yeah. No, it has happened to me. Yeah. I think sometimes it's because a scene is developing in a way that you didn't quite expect it to develop. So you had planned it one way, and then it just, the kind of dialogue takes it a certain way. And I think it's not that you've sort of lost control of the character, but suddenly you realise, actually, no, this is what she'd do in this moment, not the thing that I originally thought. So I think it is, you do have to be, I think, flexible along the way. But if you sort of know your characters and what's motivating them, then I think, sometimes you've just got to sort of go with it and think, no, actually, I think she would do this here, or I think she would react in this way if somebody said this to her. And yeah, it's nice. I like it when that happens. It's fun.
It's good fun. Then Helen was asked about whether she would consider moving away from standalone novels to write a series.
Interesting. I've never really thought about it, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out. I really like reading series, but I've never thought about writing one because I don't know. I don't know why. But yeah, what I really like is when authors just almost have little cameos from characters in their previous books that pop up in their next one. So when you sort of a sense that it's in the same world, same universe, even if it's not necessarily a continuation of the series. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't rule it out, particularly if there was a character. I think sometimes you feel like, and particularly with my books, because they're very standalone, you feel like, right, that's that character's story told now, and I'm not sure what else I could do with them. But I suppose if it's a character that's sort of got, quite often I think the best characters to recur are the ones that have got a slightly more investigatory role, and then they'll come back with some other scenario where they've ended up in an investigatory role. That's obviously where how a lot of series come to be. But yeah, I've never quite managed to find that character. I thought, yeah, I could put them in another situation and they could do this and this time. But maybe.
And finally, another writer in the room wanted Helen's tips on getting a book over the line to finally be accepted by an agent or publisher.
I always say it just has to land on the right person's desk at the right time. So somebody out there is probably looking for a book like that, and that's why it takes so much perseverance, I think, just sending it out, because you're looking for the person that's looking for that kind of thing at that time, basically. So particularly when I got my agent, I mean, she liked the book, but I had set it in the west of Scotland, which was one of her favourite places. So I think that's what first grabbed her, and it probably took it to the top of the slush pile, because she said, I've been looking for a book for years that's set there. And so that's what grabbed her. So there is a little bit of luck involved as well, I think, in terms of just having something that captures somebody's imagination at the right time. So yeah, absolutely. You just got to keep going with it and find the right person. And the thing is, when somebody does finally say, yeah, I want to publish it, then they know how to get it out to other people that want to read that kind of thing. So yeah, it's quite magical.
That's perfect. I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap things up. Before we do, just tell people where they can find you online and everything.
So I'm on Twitter, X, as it now is, at Helen Cooper 85. Facebook under Helen Cooper Writer, and Instagram under Helen Cooper Writer as well. And my website is helencooperwriter.com. So that's the theme. Yeah. Easy to remember.
It's part of the theme.
Yeah.
But for now, Helen, thanks so much for coming on Join Up Writing. Also, thanks to George, who's been on sound this evening. Although he's not there now, but he's around. He's he's over there. Oh, he's a photographer as well, you see. So give George a round of applause as well.
Yeah.
He's everywhere. But yeah, for now, thanks for coming on Join Up Writing. Really appreciate it. Thanks a million for coming. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Helen. Also, George Odom, who engineered the sound for the event and also plays all of the music for the show. And also want to thank Graham Watley and Matthew Vaughan, as well as Emily and the rest of the team at Leicester Libraries who helped to put on the event. And of course, to all of you who came down to be a part of the audience, I really appreciate it. It's great to see you all. I'll put all of Helen's links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk, and also the description on whichever device or platform you're listening to this on. So that's it for this week, other than me reminding you to make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time an episode drops. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on whichever platform you listen to, because it does help other people to find the show. And just keep recommending it to your friends, your writers, your reader friends, your bookworm friends, whoever, because they can listen to these different interviews each time, and I think they'll enjoy the show. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing or reading. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.